I named this channel The Veto because I think the people have the ultimate veto power.
That's great.
It's our freedom. We have the responsibility
Yeah,
to watch over society, to veto the bad ideas in the ballot box.
that's good.
So America's relationship with oil and gas goes far beyond what's in our family car's gas tank. What does the oil and gas industry really mean for the average American out there?
So from the moment that you wake up to the moment that you go to bed and all throughout the night, everything that you do is connected to oil and gas. It's in your medicine. It keeps you warm at night. It keeps the lights on. It's in 6,000 everyday products that you touch and use every day. This podcast would not be possible without oil and natural gas. The clothes that we're wearing would not be possible without oil and natural gas. So it's quite literally what has made modern society and modern civilization.
So here in Oklahoma, obviously we used to be known in like Tulsa, where I'm from, as the oil capital of the world. Still obviously a large impact on the industry here. What does oil and gas mean to Oklahoma still today in 2026?
Oklahoma remains driven by the oil and gas economy. So if you stop and think about it, the oil and gas industry provides more than 1/2 of Oklahoma's real annual GDP growth in good years and bad years, and has for the past 20 years. So it's really difficult to imagine an industry that sort of replaces the impact that the oil and gas industry has in Oklahoma. I have some figures here that I'll run through them. For 2023, the full year data set shows that the oil and gas industry was responsible for $60.3 billion in Oklahoma's economic activity. That's 23% of the total statewide economic activity. $54.3 billion in household earnings, $1 and $5 of total statewide household income, 1 out of every 10 jobs, and $3.2 billion in total taxes paid. So it's the largest taxpayer in the state, federal, state, and local, and it's really remarkable what it supports with regard to all of our public policy priorities, whether they be schools, roads, bridges, etc.
It's pretty incredible. In the news, I want to get your response. It's when a couple companies leave Oklahoma, very public. As someone who knows the industry as good as anyone, kind of what's your thoughts on that? There's a lot of people who are naysayers and doom and gloom about the industry, but I want to get your thoughts. How do you put that in context?
Okay, so one, no state wants to lose important companies like Devon and Expand, formerly Chesapeake. We have to admit to ourselves, you mentioned that Tulsa used to be the energy capital of the world. Tulsa is no longer the energy capital of the world. Oklahoma City is not the energy capital of the world. The energy capital of the world is in Houston. And we have to acknowledge that and play to our strengths. So it is sort of natural that Expand and Devon would decide to headquarter in Houston. That does not mean that the industry is going away. Devon is running one of 46 rigs running in the state of Oklahoma. I think the last well that Chesapeake drilled was in 2020 in Oklahoma. So that does not mean that they are insignificant players. That just means that with regard to activity, putting that capital behind the drill bit in Oklahoma to drive that economic activity and future growth, it's probably the other 969 companies that are E&P companies that are located in the Oklahoma City metropolitan statistical area or scattered across the state. There are more than 2,700 oil and gas companies on the E&P side in Oklahoma. And it's important also to remember, however, that the top 100 companies are responsible for 93% of all the oil and gas produced in Oklahoma. And the top 5 are responsible for, I think it's 40% of all the oil and gas produced in Oklahoma. So it's a shame, but the decisions that were made by Oklahoma and affected the company's planning, those decisions really were made about a decade ago or so.
So just part from my experience, I have a little bit of a theory. Actually, it's more of a observation. Okay. And that is with industries very much like oil and gas, it's often the case that involvement often outweighs consumption. What I mean that is at the point within an industry or an idea that there are less people who are actually involved in the process of production, involved in the industry, involved in the idea, as opposed to the people who consume it. You mentioned the 6,000 products. We use it every day. Everyone uses it.
Right.
I think it's very analogous to agriculture. Last time I checked, we all eat, but every single day we lose farmers. In Oklahoma, huge part of our economy for oil and gas. But we look to the years, thanks to technology and advancements by the oil and gas industry, there's fewer and fewer people as a percentage that are involved in that process. But it seems to me that you're extremely effective at messaging why it's important, and also helping lawmakers and policymakers understand the importance of it in terms of regulations. How do you do that? How do you message that when you're becoming almost a victim of your success, and that less and less people need to be involved and you're being more effective, but fewer and fewer people understand really how the process works? How do you do that?
Well, Rex Tillerson reminded me once in a conversation. You remember Rex Tillerson when he was with ExxonMobil. And he said, we've done such a good job for 150 years in this industry that people really don't even have to think about it, right? And so anytime there is some sort of event or surprise, it's actually a shock. But remember, yes, we have become more efficient. That is a fantastic thing. But communicating to lawmakers and policymakers and regulators, you always want to make certain that they understand the big picture as much as possible. It is interesting to see during the COVID downturn, and when the industry sort of began pulling back in Oklahoma, prior to the other states, by the way, after the passage of House Bill 1010XX in 2018, that people suddenly realized that they were more connected to the industry than they thought they were. Because now, with basically zero new production happening in Oklahoma during COVID, that their friends, their neighbors, their families were impacted. So-and-so did not have a job, or so-and-so was looking for work because he or she felt threatened with their job. The cascading effect is what sort of woke everyone up. So, sometimes you don't know what you have until you've lost it. I think that we've seen a little bit of that dynamic this past week or so with regard to Devon and Expand Energy's announcements regarding their headquarters locations. I think the same thing is true with regard to the other part of it, and reminding folks about how connected they are to the industry, one way or another, is critical to any sort of communication on this front.
Another area that you've been successful in is on the environmental front. Really seems like making progress of telling the story that oil and gas is, in America, is one of the safest, cleanest in terms of fuel, but also allowing more common sense regulations to take effect. I think one example of that is at the federal level, the 2009 repeal of the endangerment finding by the Trump administration. I know you guys made comments on that. Kind of for viewers, what does that mean and why is it important?
So we saw this president say in the campaign and on day one begin initiating the rollback of a tremendous amount of red tape that has hamstrung not only the oil and gas industry but other industries as well. And the repeal of the endangerment finding, or the final rule that has emerged, we know there's other steps that are going to go through there. We know there are going to be court challenges, et cetera, but that's really important because the EPA endangerment finding on greenhouse gases really was weaponized by the left. Those that want to change really, and I think Greta Thunberg was even honest about this finally when she said it's not about oil and gas, it's not about fossil fuels, but it's about changing the order of the world and really sort of redistributing wealth from one class to another class through government intervention. That's what we saw the left do with regard to the EPA endangerment finding. It was weaponized.
Do you think that Americans have turned the tide as far as when you look at green energy, tax credits, and things of that nature? There seems to be a sentiment shift in being okay with all types of energy, but should government be putting their thumb and weighing down winners and losers?
I think that not only in the United States of America, but also in Europe and other places, people are sort of waking up to perhaps a myth that they were told, a great lie when it came to intermittent power production. You've seen power increases, electricity costs increase in Europe. They're paying much, much more than we are. Even in the United States, you see states that have been unwilling to accept homegrown, U.S. domestic oil and natural gas and stop pipelines. They're paying a lot more than Oklahomans are. They're paying a lot more than Texans are, et cetera, for that. So yes, I think there has been a wake up, a breaking of the spell, so to speak, when it comes to the general populace and what they had been promised on green energy and what reality has actually been.
What are you seeing in the market right now? What are consumers seeing at the pump, and why?
Well, gasoline prices are low. The president has been very clear that what he wants to do is drive down energy costs writ large. Obviously, what that does is that feeds productivity, that feeds growth, that helps the economy. The everyday cost of items should begin decreasing, et cetera. That's all great. That's all beneficial. We are in some cases victims of our own success, right? We produce 13.6 million barrels per day of oil in the United States of America in 2025. And that is going to continue to 2026, and maybe it'll have a little bit of a downturn in 2027. We don't know. They're all projections, right? But that has helped do two things. One, it has driven down prices for the average consumer. It has made America more energy secure, that type of production. And it's also provided us with foreign policy options that leaders can adopt. We are no longer hamstrung or tied to what may happen in some sort of Gulf country.
Mm-hmm. You talked about foreign policy. When you read things by Harold Hamm and others, they talk about just the influence of the oil and gas industry on world history, yes. Frankly. And I think this administration has really put that at the forefront of their foreign policy is, are we independent as far as our energy production? Americans turn on the news, are hearing about Venezuela and Iran and others. Can you provide some context to what that means for, let's say, the oil and gas industry here in Oklahoma?
For the oil and gas industry here in Oklahoma, the capture of Maduro and those Venezuelan barrels coming on the market in the near term was going to have really minimal to no effect. Those are heavy sour crude barrels. They will be processed, hopefully, through the Gulf refineries here in the United States of America. I think that's the plan. And we're going to be sending them some light sweet crude that will help them with regard to the refining process down there. But it's going to require so much more investment in Venezuela. I mean, it's basically a Superfund site. And to get any incremental barrels out of there beyond the 200,000 or so that folks who are down there right now think they can get, it's going to require perhaps $180 billion before we start to see production beyond 500,000 barrels a day out of Venezuela, new barrels.
How much does the oil and gas affect, let's say, the relationship with Russia? We had a war with Ukraine, and a lot of that conversation is around Europe is, okay, who's buying Russian oil? How does that fit into this whole mix?
So one of the reasons that the president is talking down the price of oil with targets, being discussed of $50 and $40 is because he's trying to drag Russia and Putin to the negotiating table to end the war in Ukraine. I think when Russia invaded Ukraine, everyone figured out in Europe just how important it was to have the United States being the guarantor of natural gas supply. Putin always attacks the energy infrastructure of Ukraine, and I think that we finally, again, back to the sort of wake-up call in Europe and the United States, that's what we're seeing right now. How important energy is, how important oil and natural gas is. And we're the largest exporter right now of LNG, and a lot of that's going to Europe.
Do you feel around the market that we're in a different era as far as the outlook on oil and gas? Like an administration that appreciates the the things that oil and gas does, do you feel like we're kind of in a new era right now as compared to maybe a few years ago?
Back to the spell being broken with regard to the promises of green energy that sort of like didn't pan out. I am hopeful that we're having a little bit more awareness, even on the Democrat side, that energy is more important, that U.S. produced energy, that U.S. oil and gas is a lot more important than the policies demonstrated over the past few years. So with regard to us being sort of a new age or a new awareness, yeah, I think that we're getting to that point. Now, I don't think everyone's going to come out and sing Kumbaya on the public policy front. The left is the left, and people have to eat a lot of crow before they can admit that they were perhaps wrong. But on the idea of permitting reform, we seem to have, the beginnings of bipartisan consensus on that front, and we're hopeful that will continue. That's absolutely essential if we're going to have the infrastructure build out in the United States to really supply not only our own needs but also prepare for the future.
We've got just a couple of minutes left. Can you talk a little bit about permitting reform? Maybe someone who's not in the industry. Oil and gas is a very highly regulated industry, and I don't think people outside that might understand, but it's extremely important what you're talking about. Can you give a little bit of insight what the permitting process is?
Well, so you can't build pipelines without the permits, right? And you have lots of actors who will use the system, back to the word weaponization. They weaponize the current regulatory structure, to prevent the installation of pipelines and other infrastructure that's important. It's not only just important to the oil and gas industry, but it's also important to wind, solar, and other things as well. But that's where I think you're starting to see some awareness being built, that nobody can get a project started if we under the same regime, the regulatory regime and permitting regime that we have. And it seems like we created a problem for ourselves in the 1970s by layering on so much red tape and so much regulations that nobody can really sort of effectively move forward with a growth agenda on the energy front.
How impactful is on that regulatory process the repeal of Chevron deference and low propriety? Is that big for the industry to have that continuity?
Yes, and I think it's going to be very important for Congress to lean into that. We have not yet seen the testing of that or sort of the second phase of what that means, but repealing Chevron deference is critical. For those who don't understand it, what that basically means is that over the years we empowered unelected bureaucrats to determine what the law said instead of members of Congress who are duly elected and hold certificates of election from Oklahoma and every other place to sort of determine what gets covered by the regulations.
Yeah, I think the next question will be, we know now that power's been shifted back to the legislative branch. Will the legislative branch take it, or will they simply shift that back to courts? That'll be the question, whether or not they take that mantle up.
I think that's a decent question, and I am hopeful that our lawmakers will sort of lean into this with the serious mindedness that it's going to require to get things done.
Last question. You're looking ahead 5 to 10 years from now in the oil and gas industry. What are some of the reforms or changes you think need to take place, or that you're pushing for, to ensure that the industry remains strong and that America has reliable and affordable energy?
Well, I think in the near term, I think what is going to be critically important is that we make the regulatory improvements that have come out of the Trump administration durable. We have been in this place for a while where one administration that might be pro-oil and gas and another administration that follows might be absolutely anti-oil and gas. And that pendulum swinging makes it very hard for business leaders to make really good decisions for the long term and investments for the long term. What I'm hopeful for is that we're going to be able to put some durability behind all the improvements in this current administration so they last.
Well, I know you're very, very busy. If someone wants to follow the work of the Petroleum Alliance, how should they do that?
You can find us on the World Wide Web, and we're active on all the social media channels as well. So we have a great team that's pushing that information out. So hopefully they'll see us out there.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much for watching this content on The Veto. Be sure to like this episode and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. If you'd like to join our newsletter, you can visit yourveto.com to get emails about new episodes and information directly in your inbox. Don't forget that we the people hold the ultimate veto power. We'll see you next time.